So we have our model set up, and this time around I'd like to set up a new application route that will allow us to display a single movie. And the first thing I'm going to do is, I had a little typographical error here. This should not be updated at with the capital A. It should be updated at like that. And of course, naturally, I copied and pasted it twice, so I have to fix it in 2 more places. Alright, just cosmetic, but it makes me feel better. So what I'm going to do is in my command API folder, I'll create a new file, which I'll call movie-handlers.go. And I'll put all of my movie handlers in here. And we'll give it its package declaration, which I'll call main, of course. And I'll define 2 functions. The first one will get 1 movie, and the second one, which will be a stub for now, will get all of our movies. So, func, and it has the receiver of app, which is a pointer to application. And I'll call this one get 1 movie. And because it's a handler, it takes a response writer and a request as arguments. So w_http.responseWriter. And r will be a pointer to http.request. And now I'll just copy this and give it a different name. And this will be get all movies. Okay. So now let's go back to our routes file, and let's set up routes that go to those stub handlers. So here I'll say router handler func, and this will be a get request, http.method get, and I'm going to go to not movie / and then the ID, and this is how we put a placeholder for a numeric or any kind of ID that will be different based upon the route we're matching. Instead, I'm going to prepend the whole thing with v1, because this is a convention. When you're building a REST API, occasionally your API has to change. And if it introduces a breaking change, typically you would go from version 1 to version 2. So I'll use v1. And we'll route this to app.get1movie, right there. Now I'll duplicate that route and change this to movies, and route that to get all movies. Okay, so now we have 2 new routes, but of course the handlers aren't doing anything, so let's go back to movie handlers. And we're only going to take care of this one right now. So what we're going to do first of all is, you'll notice back in our routes, we have :ID. And of course this is a syntax we're allowed to use because we're using Julian Schmidt's HTTP router. So let's go see how we're going to work with that. Back in our movie handlers, the very first thing I'm going to do is to try to figure out what that ID is. And I'll do that by creating a variable called params, like that. Params is assigned the value of, and I'll call one of the functions that's available to us from HTTP router. And the method we're looking for is called params from context, right there. And I chose it from the list, so it imported it for me. And that takes 1 argument, which is simply the context, which we get from r.context. So that gives me a params variable. Now what can I do with that? Well, quite a bit actually. We can take that param variable and look for a specific one by its key. So I'll say ID and error are assigned the value of strconv, because it's coming in as a string, so I need to convert it to an int. strconv a to I, and I will go for params.byName, and the ID I'm looking for, or the name I'm looking for, is ID, like that. And I'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, then for now I'll just say app.logger.println, and I'll write a new error. Errors.new, and I'll just say invalid ID parameter, because we only want numeric values to come in that way. Now in a moment, we'll actually do something else here and stop execution. But for now, we'll just leave it like that, okay? So, just to make sure this is working, let's say app.logger.println. ID is, and we'll print out the ID. So let's start our application. If it's running, we'll stop it. Let's see if it's running. It is. So I'll stop it. I'll start it, see if it compiles. And it does. Let's go back to our web browser. And status should still work, so let's refresh this. It does. Now, let's go v1/movie/ and I'll give it the ID of 10. And now I'll go look at my log file in my IDE, and it says ID is 10. Perfect. We've got that part working all right. Now, what do we actually want to do? We want to do more than print out the ID, so I'll stop this. I just want to see if I can get one movie to show up as JSON. So what I'll do is I'll create a movie from that models.movie type that we defined a little while ago. And I'll put some information in here. So ID, and I'll call that ID, the one we've got from our parameters, and we'll give it a title. And no matter what the ID is, for now, it'll be giving the same title and other information. So I'll just put placeholder information in. Some movie is the title, description is some description, and we'll go with year, say 2021, and release date will be a new date, so time.date, and we'll give it a year, 2021, first month, first day, and first hour, and then 0, 0, 0, and then just the local time zone. That'll get us working, okay? So there's a release date, and we also want a runtime, and I think that's about 100 minutes should do it. I have an error here. What is this? Models. Oh, it didn't import it for us. Okay, let's try that again. Models.movie. And down here, we'll go with rating, say 5 stars. And the next line, MPAA rating, we'll go with PG-13. And finally, created at will be time.now, and updated at will be time.now. And get rid of my extra comma. Okay, now we have a movie. So we can, as we did before, convert that to JSON and send it back. But this seems like it's the second time we're having to create JSON and send it to the browser by hand. And that seems really inefficient. So let's create a function to do that for us. And what I'll do is in my command API folder, I'll create a new file. I'll just call it utilities.go. And inside of that, let me put my package declaration. What I want to do here is to write a simple function that will write JSON to the browser. So let's write a function. Func, and we'll give it the receiver, app, star.application, and this will just save me from duplicating code, and I'll just call it write JSON, like that. And I'll make it take a few arguments. First of all, you need a response writer, obviously, because you have to have somewhere to write it. Then you need a status code, which will be an int, and you need the data to convert to JSON. We don't know what that's going to be, so I'll just call it interface, like that. And finally, I'm going to give it something called wrap, which is a string, and you'll see why in a moment. So this wrap is going to be used to wrap our JSON with some kind of key, something that describes the kind of content that's coming out of there. And the easiest way to do that is simply to create a wrapper, which is a variable, and it's going to be nothing more than a map with a key of string and any kind of content you want, interface. So that's my variable. Now when I call this function, what I'm going to do is wrap the data that's passed as the parameter in line 5. I'm going to wrap that with something. So I'll say wrapper, and the key will be wrap is equal to data. And now I just do what I did before. I'll say JS and error, or assign the value of JSON.marshal, and this time I won't marshal indent. And I'm going to marshal wrapper. And I'll check for an error. If error is not equal to nil, then I'll say return an error, because this function really should return an error, like that. There. Otherwise, I'll just send it off as JSON. So I'll say w.header.set, and this is going to be content type, just like before, application JSON. And then I'll write my status, w.writeHeader, and that will be status, which we receive as a parameter. And then we w.write JS. And if everything worked, we'll return nil. So now I have a function that I can call to send JSON back to the end user. So let's go back to our handlers, and let's try using that function. Really, all I'm going to have to do here is to say on this line, error equals @.writeJSON, and hand it its required parameters, which would be W, a response writer. This would be status OK, http.status OK. Our data, which in this case is just movie. And then what do we want to wrap it in? Movie, like that. So let's just try this bit and see if it works. So I'll run my application. It's started. Let's go back to our web browser and try going to v1/movie/10. And there is my content. Absolutely perfect. And you notice that it's wrapped in the key we used as movie. So if I look at the raw data, it comes as a single line because I use json.marshall, not json.marshall indent. But because I'm in Firefox, I can change this to pretty print, and it looks a little better. So everything is wrapped with this key movie. And all that does is make the JSON more readable. So that is one way to get information sent to our end user. Now, of course, if I change this 10 to a, say, 20, I should get the same content, but now the ID is 20. So that seems to be working really well. So the next thing I want to do is to do more in this part of the handler. So if we go back and look at our code, if there's an error, for example, if I put A there instead of a number, then it should stop. It should generate a good, nicely formatted JSON error message and send it back to the user with the key of error at the top level. So we'll take care of that in the next lecture.